the makers, the hackers, and the innovators, building the future of digital health. It's time to start the Digital Health Workbench podcast, hosted by Jeff McCleary.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining this month. Excited to have you back to the Digital Health Workbench podcast. I'm your host, Jeff McCleary, and I'm very excited to be able to welcome our guest for this month, Emre Ozcan, who is the Global Head of Digital Health for the health sector at Merck KGAA, Darmstadt, Germany. So, Emre, welcome to the podcast.
Delighted to be here, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for joining. We started this out, and I kind of asked the same question to everybody as we've talked a little bit before. None of us are really born into digital health. We kind of matured into it as we grow, right? I'd love if you could share a little bit about your personal journey into digital health. Like, where'd you start out, and how'd you get to where you are today?
Excellent question, Jeff. I have three origins to where I found how I find myself at the moment. The first one is the curiosity element. When I reflect on my upbringing, childhood, especially being driven by hard questions, a lot of people go back about their stories about how they love building stuff. And in my case, it was thinking about big picture problems, things that I find confusing, things that I find quite puzzling. So something that gives me that excitement that I might be the first one to crack it. That probably resonates with a lot of the people that are dealing with the world of the digital health. The second point is I spent quite a bit amount of time in BCG as a junior partner. And a lot of the exposure I had in the world of biopharma, medtech, especially around the theme of value-based healthcare, cried out for solutions and a bigger drive around digital health. Digital health's ability to connect various different actors in the healthcare systems. Digital health's ability to especially avoid the large amount of wastage we see in the system. Digital health's ability to generate the data to put us in a more equal footing to be able to drive a more value-based healthcare evolution. I would say that would be the second point. And the third one is our organization's boldening agenda as a science and technology company to provide more well-integrated digital health around the drug solutions to be able to advance our portfolio, our pipeline for better care, for better outcomes, and better partnerships with our healthcare systems beyond the classical approach of just so to say the drug.
Yeah.
So Jeff, these are, I think, the three elements that when I reflect on sometimes, why the hell have I found myself in this world of digital health? The 3 points that come up.
Yeah. I love the curiosity angle and that kind of how can I fix this problem kind of approach. Like when you think about kind of over the years, getting to this point, what were the kind of the biggest challenges that you really kind of latched onto to see that like here's an area that we can fix or we need to fix?
I think there are numerous areas in that. I think the primary one that at least I always take it as the lighthouse on how I think and how I try to go back to the first principles around it is around the value-based healthcare. Mm-hmm. What are the ultimate outcomes we want to achieve for patients, for the key stakeholders in the system, while minimizing while using our resources as effectively as possible. So once we start through these lenses, I think it is not that difficult to identify a number of issues that you think we should be addressing. One of them. And one of them is really the real world evidence data generation. In many cases where our industry is exceptionally good at is the pipeline development, the data generation around that, and using of those evidences then to build better products, better value propositions. But when it comes to the real life situations where things can get very messy, one example, for example, is that when we do product development, especially on the drug product development, we deal with global systems. These are global level development areas undertakings. But when it comes to the reality of the healthcare system, it is an extremely local business. So how then do we bring these global mindsets and skills to be able to address concrete opportunities and problems in the local space? So that's also another area where I think that this value-based healthcare thinking and what we're trying to do in the organization is speaking directly to the facts and opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think at an organizational level, as you pointed out, like there's the global scale, but the local implementation. How are you framing kind of the work that you need to be doing and that the organization is doing to kind of support and grow that?
There are three parts in our approach. One is historically, for those that are familiar with the digital health world, as you put it nicely, we've gone through different stages. There has been an element of, what I call the Davos element, right? We need to do something. All the key stakeholders want to do something. So let's start planting some flowers here and there. And then we realize that a lot of these flowers will not grow into gardens. So we need to be thinking a bit more broadly and deeply about what would it take to implement a new idea in the complexities of healthcare systems. So what the approach we're taking now, and I'm saying this with all the cautions around it, I believe still the progress of digital health is solidly moving, but there are a number of fragilities in this. The first one is really starting from the problems and the needs around the care continuum. And many times we took out hammers because the technologies exist and then try to go and look for the right nails, the right opportunities for this to address. Now it's about shifting the perspective other way. There has never been a conversation recently where my stakeholders thought we lack the right technology to do that. So on the contrary, the technologies are emerging or mature, but using the right one against the right opportunity needs is one. So that's one. Start with that concrete opportunity and then the needs along the care continuum. The second one is as we develop these solutions, think about the right ecosystem in two ways. One is the ecosystem of those players that need to sit around the table to develop the right solutions in the right way. And the second one is those local ecosystem players that need to be co-creating these solutions, embracing them and embedding in their changes in clinical flows, their management processes in any dimension of the healthcare system. And then the third one is do this in a way that is quick, agile, and very open to learning. Many cases, again, in the case of biopharma or medtech that have been building muscles, DNAs for long-term innovation, development, these things don't naturally come to us. So how do we now get into a digital-first mindset in our development, in our value proposition to create this speed and agility to put Southampton in the market in the best possible way, but be very open to feedback, learn, adopt, relaunch. That's, I think, the third element we're trying to get to it. And one key point where we are trying to learn a lot more from the other industries is around the design thinking, user centricity, and behavioral science element. We're very proud to be a patient-directed company. And I think that is the right evolution to walk away from patient centricity that everybody talks about. But in many cases, the patient misses in the room when you're designing the product, to involving the patients in the design of the product. But there is a nuance to it. Like all of us, humans, patients are humans. What they say, what they might do, might differ from what they do in real life. This is true for patients, carers, all of us. So what we're trying to do there, especially bring more behavioral science thinking to understand how the humans, our patients, going to tick. What is going to be their motivators? What's going to be their barriers? And what are the ways in which we could nudge that? Digital health is very much about the patient, payer, and HCP behavior as much as it is anything else.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the behavior a little bit, but before that, something that you talked about, you used the garden example and the planting of the flowers, and not every flower blooms. Sometimes they have to be pruned ahead of time, right? So, when you think about that agile way of working in digital health, it used to be you did an app or you did a program to get promoted in pharma. And I think that has changed over the years. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about, there's the mentality around fail fast and advance and figure it out. And is that a cultural change that you've seen happen over the years, and how do you address that when you think about agile development, like taking what these patients want, what we've identified from a patient needs standpoint, and putting that through the process in a way that you can learn from it, abandon those failures, and move forward? Like, how do you deal with that within the organizational structure?
It's an excellent question. Going back to some of, I think, what made pharma so far successful is antithetical to this way of thinking, right? I mean, this is a very much a careful, extremely data-driven, rigorous industry. It's very careful about how it does things, what it does. So in this context, I think what we're trying to do is, without sacrificing the very good practices of these, trying to change the mindset and some of the processes we're approaching this with. One idea is, and also the second related topic, it is, I think we matured in the market to know that if you just put an app out there and expect great results out of it, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think the market knows that, the patients know it, and there is the commoditization of bad apps there. So it's not going to be holding water as it used to before. So what we're trying to do here in this cultural journey, we're part of it, is create that a joint vision about what is that needs to be done. So when we're ready to chase an opportunity, accelerate a program, we don't necessarily go back to the basics of what is that we're trying to solve here. I think that's why statement of it is becoming to a more mature place, and it just needs that constant care of evolving around it. And the second element here is, for those that's been in the technology world, maybe what we're seeing in the AI side is we've seen it before. These technologies come with their broader hypes, and it requires a period of a digestion and then integration into the system. But what it does is suddenly focuses the conversation on technology's ability to solve a number of problems we see. Possibly the healthcare system evolution, insofar as being very marginal and slow, I think has these moments of acceleration. And I think these are the moments to use those acceleration. I mean, to use an analogy here, I mean, a fish could be swimming in the river. And I don't think that nature of it is going to change in pharma. But if you find the right flows for the fish to go, you will accelerate very quickly and then come to a point that would have been maybe not possible before. In my previous life, I used the term of leapfrogging to capture this idea, right? And when we have so much learnings that we could capture from other industries, from our own, what are the ways in which we could avoid the mistakes that we have seen others people do and leapfrog to a better state? And I think this is really the beauty of this AI first thinking in many of the things we do now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that those waves of new technology kind of wash over and they come and go, to your point, but right, like it's what's the value you can retain out of that? What things have some permanence and help accelerate the work you're doing? And to go back to your point on the behavioral piece, like from an understanding of a patient and what is going to motivate them, what are the nudges or bumps along the way that help them get to a better place. Maybe you can share a little bit about how what kind of your process is in looking at those. Like, how do you build in that understanding or that identification of those patient needs and the factors that will move them, and also balance that with the relevance of, hey, this is coming from our organization. and why a patient would use that versus, your point, there's a lot of technology out there. Like, what is the value that you can bring to them in that exchange?
I mean, I read your question in two aspects: in what are the right processes for us or the right methodologies for us to follow to get to a good place. And the second one is more of the stakeholder expectation management and communication. So if I take the first question, three things that immediately come to my mind about when it is a new opportunity is start with the care continuum. I mean, on this, as a biopharma and in many medtech companies, drilled to think along these lines. And one beauty of it is knowing your customer, knowing your stakeholders, knowing the real implementation challenges. And in many cases, there are very nuanced distinctions. Also, what is a prevention and what is awareness, right? What is diagnostics and what is treatment? So to get to that. The second element to me is going to be a matter of building the right business case is going to require chasing that value. So now in the organization, we position ourselves not as an innovation team, not as a technology team, but my slogan is around creating, demonstrating, and sustaining value. While it might sound, a bit, let's say, corporate language, there is something conceptually very powerful around the idea of a value, because different stakeholders in the healthcare system look at it very differently. Some from their strategic perspective, some look at it from their P&L perspective. So in the second step for me is dismantling that idea of value. Identifying what each stakeholder has at stake here and what are the ways in which we could bring these stakeholders' incentivizations together to make any kind of innovation successful. And then the third part is where the technology pieces come in. And it's really important here in this conversation that technology is never the starting point or even the secondary point. Is in the technology is being very clear on who will be developing this technology, who will be integrating that, and then who are going to be maintaining when it's a matter of use with the customers. Mm-hmm. I think that's the piece where then we look also a lot to our key stakeholders, our digital health partners, to be able to develop the product in the right way out there. I think it's not pharma's or medtech's core business is software, and it is an element. I think the industry has gone through its various shapes and forms to end up with the idea that pharma better focus on their competitive advantage areas while working with the right partners to get the right products into the market.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because I think we see a lot like where the technology leads a lot of these efforts, and it's really not about the technology, to your point, right? It's if your starting point is, hey, we've got this new technology we want to use, you've already not thought about the patient or the physician or your end stakeholder and that kind of experience that they need, and then the value becomes very nebulous. And I guess the other question I had for you is from a value standpoint. You talked about all the value means different things to different stakeholders, right? Yeah. And it's easier to maybe look at that and go, okay, well, I can see value there. I can see value in this place or this place. Like, how do you translate that to actually achieving that value or delivering that value in those particular areas?
That's for us the point around the road mapping and then the implementation. And then the point we discussed earlier is about that agility you want to build in the process come important. So when we talk about value, there is a distinction between the value identification and value extraction, so to say. Mm-hmm. The reason why I'm mentioning is in healthcare systems, however you look at it, it's not that difficult to find sources of wastage, sources of opportunities. So the value sits in various places. But when it comes to providing the right service, the product, way of working, to extract that value, right, make something out of it, it is a different equation. We deal with such highly interdependent systems. that have entrenched ways of working, hot dependencies, it becomes important to think about the primary effect and the secondary effect of the changes you want to do in the system and what they will lead to, and how to go and then try to counter those areas as well. So, for example, in many cases now, what we observe in the healthcare systems is the doctors, the HCPs, would like to see some data from the patients before the appointment, right? It's in a way of preparing the patient and the HCP to a critical face-to-face conversation, where you want to do really human to human rather than everybody looks into their papers trying to find the data that might take longer time than the conversation itself. So as we have a number of technologies to get that ready, what we realize is unless the behavior of the clinical flows change, the time we save in preparing these right data, right, with the right insights, don't lead to any improvement in the healthcare system, because the time you save initially will not be reflected into time gain to be used for some other activity side of it. So that is the one I think my at least key insight in this is the ability to think, orchestrate, and activate the right partners in the process to be able to make these changes as sticky as possible.
Right. And it's so from that aspect, it's not just, it's taking that bigger holistic picture of understanding, like, to your point, like you could make a change, but it could get lost in 19 other inefficiencies in the process, right?
Exactly.
And when you think about that, from your standpoint, how do you could focus on, hey, we've got to transform so much of the health system, right? You could fall down a pretty big rabbit hole, right? How do you identify the relevant areas and make the decisions on, we're going to commit to this as part of this program, because these are the discrete areas that we can kind of contain, because otherwise you could end up spending a lot of money and have not the desired impact on what you want to do, right?
Yeah. I don't know what this saying exists in many languages, but in Turkish there's a saying, the path to hell is paved with pebbles of good intentions. I think the situation really calls out for it, for those that are really going after the big healthcare system transformation, the big revolutions, right? There's rarely a conference on digital health that doesn't have the title revolution in it. My perspective is a lot more down to earth and pragmatic about what these areas could be done, especially from a pharma perspective, a major credible stakeholder, healthcare systems, but one among many players. So let me give you an example of what we try to do. For example, we are very active in human growth hormone space, where in our category we are a market leader, and we have a pretty good understanding of the challenges the patients and their carers, especially in this case children and adolescents, face, and their sometimes anxious parents face, how the HCP and the clinics work with this patient group, and how the payers look into the investment into these areas as a way of their health economics overall. And in some ways, it's a critical topic. We're dealing with the most valuable asset of any society, it's children, and it's their lifespan ability to realize themselves in the most perfect fashion. So what we try to do is, again, understanding of that care continuum, see what are the patients, how they act, how they want to be acting. And this is very interesting. Children going through a very precious stage in their lives where they need to retain the treatment, managing their carers, thinking about the clinics. And we're talking about a 5 to 8 year timeline of treatment. So this is a matter of where the understanding of the clinics will come. So one element is in this regular treatment part, one thing we realize is that the clinics don't necessarily want to do all the treatment steps regularly in the clinics. Patients don't necessarily want to do it. They want to make it a more integral part of their lives. So then the idea becomes, can we make the drug administration connected And then from that, create the digital channels on the remote patient monitoring, in the data generation, and then also these gamifications that will help children and their carers to make sure that they're as engaged as possible in the treatment journey. So then in this broader understanding, right, in the big picture thinking, we take more targeted and focus interventions to make the system better and then create that value across it. If I talk about oncology, I think I will tell you the same methodology with the different conclusions, and it will be the same in other areas where we play, for example, female infertility and multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, and it's a great way to kind of think through that approach and think about how you have the impact that's going to matter, right? Like when you look from an organizational standpoint, again, we talked a little bit about that's not necessarily native to the culture of pharma, and you used the example of looking to outside industries. Like, I love to ask the question about kind of your workbench, right? So, I think we're all kind of makers at heart in this space, and understand, like, what are the tools or the people or the types of resources that you have to keep on the workbench in your role to be able to make those decisions, to be able to get those programs up and running and show success?
It's an excellent question, and Jeff, I would go with a cop-out answer, and I think the answer is going to be around everybody.
Jeez.
One element of, I think, around the digital health is its ability to penetrate the needs and opportunities across the entire organization. Right? Let me give you the example of it. I mean, ultimately, those that work with the customers, HCPs, and the patients are in-country teams, our medical teams, and a lot of the ideas and the needs need to start from that. Then when those ideas come back, right, we have to work with our development teams, and I'm talking about the real drug development teams, and their primary job is thinking not about the drug, but about the therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And baking in these solutions into what we call the TPPs. So these ideas are baked in from the get-go about the treatment provision, rather than just getting one drug over the fence into the market. Then the work also takes the form of our more technical teams coming into equation, engineering, quality, regulatory, data privacy elements. And then the element of where the franchises, the product owners, then become and integrate these into their processes, the business cases, and then the performance targeting. So I know my answer sort of sounds like maybe a unified theory of what needs to be done. But when I look into the most successful examples of pharma endorsing, embracing digital health, it is the ones that find themselves into the high streets of pharma. Yeah. Has become a way of how it thinks, how it plans, and how it acts, rather than all these little flowers that we have historically planted without necessarily seeing gardening element to it. Yeah. Which brings me to an important point. I think we don't talk about it enough in the world of digital health, is the idea of leadership. Mm-hmm. And the people side of it, because the conversations usually find itself to the tech teams or the CEOs, right? And then assuming that this is something that is going to come to people naturally. Do we, for example, have career pathways for digital health people in the pharma industry or on the medtech? As you pointed out, none of us were born into this world and are trying to find ourselves way into it against a rising and growing agenda. So what we try to do is also play this leadership element in our organizational change. And one element that I'll try to keep in my mind is we have to be many things to many people at the same time. So some cases we have to wear the hat of a visionary, thinking about the future and excite the organization around that vision. Sometimes we take the form of the architect, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing to put out a vision out there, but paving the way to get there, designing it is something else. In some cases, we play the role of the catalyst, right? It's fine to have a roadmap, but how you get people walk on that roadmap, engage with it, change it, modify it. I think that's catalyst element come to it. In many cases, I find myself bridging between our key teams, medical and the commercials, our engineering and our brand teams. And I think that's the conversation that is meaningful, although it stretches people and in critical ways. And then the last element is the coaching. So for those that are building their careers, feel the passion, the attraction of this topic, in a world of pharma or in a world of healthcare, we talk about failing fast, but failing is not something that comes to people easily, or it's not something that we naturally embrace. Or how many meetings you think going to go extremely well if in the first minute you say, we're here to design how we're going to be failing and how quickly, right? So that element of that coaching, right, linking it to people's own individual behaviors. All of us are, as much as patients are humans, every human is going to be a patient at some point as well. So relating to how people tick and motivate, I think in that coaching element also becomes important to helping the ship going fast.
Yeah,
in a pharma.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. I think the leadership piece is super critical too, because when you look at where, and I'm curious to understand from your organization standpoint, how do you see digital health sitting in each of these areas, right? Are there embedded folks? Is it kind of lead by influence? Because it isn't just, if there's one area in the organization that touches so many parts, right? It's digital health, right? Because you've got the drug asset, you've got the marketing and commercial teams, you've got the IT, you've got leadership and strategy. And how do you optimize the organization as a leader within the organization to really adapt to that? Or how are you? You may not be there yet, since a lot of places aren't as well. But how do you think that through?
There are three parts where I try to navigate. I think in this one is as much as I think have walked away from Davos-centric way of, healthcare transformation and digital health. Senior leadership support is very key. And it's not necessarily suddenly setting up large-scale innovation teams, chief digital officers to run around, but bringing it up in the core foundations of a pharma company and what it is, what it wants to be, and where it is going. And I think it creates fantastic stories, which we were embracing before, but now we can formulate it better. When we talk about being patient-directed, digital health gives us a whole new venues to show the different methodologies and tools of how we do that. So that would be one. The second one is in an organization of our size or any biopharma company, a healthcare company, it is impossible to think about the concept of control. It's I say you do.
Yeah.
We've been asked to do that, right? So you get into a sphere of inspiration and influence of getting people work on the right things in the right way. And at least for my organization, I'm proud to say there are a lot of capable and able people that had been waiting for these opportunities, that have been thinking along these lines, and now they are better equipped to embrace these elements. I'm not saying the journey is finished. On the contrary, but I think these are the signs of the maturity that these digital health ideas are not are becoming the more high streets of how a pharma works, rather than the gold pathways of always finding an innovative way of proceeding just to get to the right idea. And then the third element is the orchestration. You could have the vision, you could have the influence, the inspiration, but unless you create the right, let's say, the processes, and here I'm not talking about an extremely detailed out, everything hashed out. I think that would be probably the best way to kill any kind of innovation, is ensuring that people's incentives, ways of working, accountabilities are tied together. So when I would meet my team, many times my meeting includes the people that I don't have direct control over, but my business associates around the table coming from different functions. And I need them. They need me to be able to drive this agenda. So that's where the reality also becomes quite important to move this digital health away from visions and aspirations to how we get anything done in a concrete, meaningful way for the customers.
Yeah, I think that's really, those are really great points. I think we see a lot of companies that struggle with how to design that model or define that model, and I think to your point, the tendency is to lean towards a command and control model that I think we all can see doesn't work as effectively as more influence and orchestration. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think the last question I wanted to ask you is kind of we've talked a lot about maturity, we've talked a lot about kind of the efforts to figure it out and be agile and move forward, and the waves of technology that come and go. As you look forward, from your organization standpoint, but also from the broader kind of digital health industry standpoint, what are the things that you see coming or that you're looking towards as being kind of more transformative and enablers in this space?
It's a good technology question, Jeff. I mean, when I look into out there, I think there are two types of things that I find going to be quite the game changers out of this. One is, I know I'm maybe joining the hype, but AI's ability to automate a number of administrative tasks, right? What we see our customers are dealing with is definitely a big gain out of that. And then the secondly is when it comes to the augmentation of the HCPs, right? Them working more with data, working more with the digital tools to be able to save time, take better decisions, save the time to engage with the patients on human elements, I think is going to be massively interesting. And I think these two elements going to take longer than what people expect. In many cases, I hear the talks around the entire transformation of these elements, and I don't think these are necessarily desirable nor feasible at this stage. So it's just really taking the potential of AI step by step, but solidly forward. Because in the healthcare systems, if you don't generate the value, the system itself is complex and conservative to be able to shut down these ideas very quickly. So that's one thing, and I think one way of looking at this progress of it. And then the second element here is we do today with a lot of remote patient monitoring technologies. We deal with a lot of sophisticated connected drug delivery mechanisms and the patient adherence programs. But one element I think we're just really scratched the surface of it is the digital biomarkers part of it, right? Our bodies, our behaviors speak to us in a way that we don't understand ourselves, nor our HCPs are capable of doing it in the limited type of observations they have. The mobiles we carry. I mean, the way I look at my phone with my eye movement, to the way my voice speaks, right? The way I type. I think getting these data in a meaningful fashion that's linked with the kind of diagnostics we're after is going to be a game changing. We know there's a lot of investment in this space. There's a lot of understandably hype, but once we really start mastering of it, the amount of people we will be able to diagnose a lot earlier, get to the right treatment in the best possible way, is going to be creating all those wins from the patients to the HCPs, through the healthcare governments to the providers. So I think these are the two elements that I'm really feeling very positive about the progress, as long as we don't suffocate these technologies with the wrong expectations. And then with the wrong incentivization setting for them to be embraced by the healthcare systems.
Yeah, no, that's critical, and I think really good insights as well. I with that, we've had a great conversation, Emre. I think the leadership in the space that you're providing and the work that your organization is doing, and that focus on the patient and the respective value that can be generated across that spectrum, I think is really important to share with our audience. So I appreciate your time today. Appreciate you joining, and thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Jeff, likewise, I really appreciate the kind of questions you've asked, the conversation you've been leading, and also your organization's broad work in stretching the agenda while remaining very concrete about the execution and the ability to move ahead. I think is exemplary. Thanks for the opportunities, and for those that are working in the digital health, it is moving.
Well, we'll end it on that. That's a great note. Thanks, Emre. Thanks, everyone, for joining.